In the quiet village of Willowmere, where the cobblestone streets curved gently beneath drooping lanterns and the river hummed its slow evening song, there stood a small and crooked shop that most people passed without noticing. It leaned a little to one side, as though it had grown tired over the centuries and decided to rest against its neighbors. The windows were made of thick, wavy glass that softened the world outside into gentle shapes and colors, and above the door hung a wooden sign carved with a single open book. The paint had long since faded, but if you looked closely in the right light, you could still see faint golden letters that spelled out the words, "The Enchanted Bookshelf." The shop belonged to an old woman named Alara, whose silver hair was always tucked beneath a soft blue shawl and whose eyes held the warm patience of someone who had listened to 1,000 quiet stories. She had lived above the shop for as long as anyone could remember, and though children sometimes whispered that she was a witch, the truth was far gentler than that. Alara was simply a keeper of books, and she understood something that most people had forgotten. She knew that certain books, if cared for with enough love and kept upon a certain shelf, could hold a little bit of magic between their pages. At the very back of the shop, past the towering rows of leather-bound volumes and the comfortable armchairs worn soft by years of reading, stood a tall bookshelf made of dark and gleaming oak. It reached from the floor all the way to the ceiling, and its shelves were carved with tiny vines and stars and sleeping moons. This was the Enchanted Bookshelf, and only Alara knew its true secret. Each night, when the last customer had gone and the door was locked and the lamps burned low, the books upon that shelf would begin to glow with the softest silver light, and the stories inside them would stir like sleepers waking from a dream. There was a little girl in the village named Wren, who had recently come to live with her grandmother after a long and tiring journey from a distant town. Wren was 7 years old, with a tangle of curly brown hair and a habit of asking a great many questions. She found the new village strange and quiet, and at night she often lay awake in her small bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds and wishing for something she could not quite name. She missed her old home, and she missed the way her mother used to read to her before sleep, tracing the words with a gentle finger and letting the stories carry them both away. One drizzly afternoon, while wandering the village to escape her restlessness, Wren discovered the crooked little shop with the faded sign. The rain had begun to fall in soft gray sheets, and she ducked beneath the doorway to shelter, not really meaning to go inside. But the door swung open with a warm and welcoming creak, and from within came the scent of old paper and beeswax candles and something sweet, like honey and dried flowers. Before she quite knew what she was doing, Wren stepped across the threshold and into the hushed and golden world of the bookshop. Alara looked up from her place behind the counter and smiled, as though she had been expecting the girl all along. She did not fuss or ask too many questions. Instead, she simply gestured toward the armchairs at the back and told Wren that she was welcome to stay as long as the rain lasted, and that she might read any book she liked while she waited. Wren, who loved books more than almost anything, felt the tightness in her chest begin to loosen for the first time since arriving in Willowmere. She wandered slowly through the shelves, running her fingers along the spines, breathing in the quiet comfort of the place. It was not long before she found herself standing before the tall oak bookshelf at the very back of the shop. Something about it drew her closer, though she could not have said what. The carved vines seemed to shimmer faintly, and the little wooden moons appeared almost to be sleeping rather than merely shaped that way. She reached out and touched the edge of one shelf, and in that moment she felt the faintest warmth beneath her fingertips, like the memory of sunlight held in wood. A single book near the bottom seemed to lean toward her, just slightly, as though inviting her to take it down. She paused there for a long moment, her hand resting lightly upon the little book, and a curious feeling of calm settled over her, the sort of feeling one has upon returning to a beloved place after a long time away. It was as though the book already knew her, as though it had been placed upon that shelf and kept safe through all the passing years for the sole purpose of waiting until she came. Slowly, carefully, she drew it out from its place, and the other books seemed to shift gently to fill the gap, and the whole shelf gave off a faint and pleasant warmth, like the glow of embers on a winter hearth. The book was bound in deep green cloth, soft as moss, with silver thread stitched around the edges in the shape of curling leaves. There was no title on the cover, only a small embossed picture of a fox curled beneath a crescent moon. Wren carried it carefully to the nearest armchair and settled into the cushions, tucking her feet beneath her. When she opened the cover, the pages were warm and smelled of pine and cold night air, and the first words seemed to rise gently up to meet her, as though the story had been waiting a very long time for someone to read it at last. The tale within told of a small red fox named Ember, who lived at the edge of a great and ancient forest where the trees grew so tall that their tops brushed the underside of the stars. Ember was a curious and kind-hearted creature, with bright amber eyes and a bushy tail tipped in white, and a heart that longed to understand the mysteries of the world. Every night, Ember would sit at the very edge of the forest and gaze up at the moon, wondering where it went during the day and why it changed its shape as the month turned, and whether it ever felt lonely up there in the wide and silent sky. As Wren read, something remarkable began to happen, though she was so absorbed in the story that she scarcely noticed at first. The words upon the page seemed to lift and soften, and the sounds of the rain and the shop faded away, and a gentle silver light began to gather around her like a warm and quiet mist. When she looked up from the book, she found that she was no longer sitting in the armchair at all. She was standing at the edge of the great ancient forest from the story, with cool grass beneath her bare feet and a sky full of stars stretched wide above her head. For a moment Wren felt a flutter of fear, but it passed as quickly as it came, for the forest was so calm and so beautiful that it seemed impossible anything unkind could dwell there. The air smelled of pine and moss and distant rain, and everywhere she looked, tiny points of light drifted lazily through the branches like slow and sleepy fireflies. And there, sitting on a smooth gray stone just a few steps away, was the little red fox himself, gazing up at the moon exactly as the story had described. He turned his bright amber eyes toward her and did not seem surprised at all to see a girl standing in his forest. Ember greeted her warmly, in a voice as soft as falling leaves, and told her that visitors from the reading world were rare and precious things, and that he was very glad she had come. Wren, who had never spoken with a fox before, found that it felt entirely natural, the way the strangest things often do in dreams. She sat down beside him on the cool grass and asked him what he was doing, and Ember explained that he was searching for the answer to a question that had troubled him for many long nights. He wished to know where the moon went when it vanished from the sky, for he worried that it might be lost or lonely, and he wanted to be sure it always found its way home. Wren thought this was a very good and important question, and she agreed at once to help him find the answer. And so the two of them set off together into the great forest, the girl and the fox, walking side by side beneath the canopy of ancient trees. The path wound gently between mossy stones and silver streams, and the drifting lights followed along above them, lighting the way with their soft and friendly glow. As they walked, Ember told Wren about all the creatures of the forest, the wise old owls and the shy deer and the singing crickets, and Wren told him about the village of Willowmere and the crooked little bookshop where their adventure had begun. After a time, they came to a wide and quiet clearing where a pool of still water lay like a mirror beneath the open sky. The moon was reflected perfectly upon its surface, round and full and glowing, and around the edges of the pool grew flowers that opened only at night, their pale petals releasing a gentle fragrance into the cool air. An old gray heron stood at the water's edge on one long leg, so still that Wren at first mistook it for a statue. But when they drew near, the heron blinked its wise old eyes and greeted them, for it too had lived long enough to remember the ways of magic. The heron listened patiently to Ember's question, and then it told them a secret that few creatures had ever heard. It explained that the moon did not truly vanish at all, but simply traveled to the other side of the world to share its light with those who slept in darkness there. It said that the moon was never lost and never lonely, for it was always watching over someone, somewhere, and that even when it could not be seen, it remained faithfully in the sky, keeping its quiet and patient watch. Ember's eyes grew wide with wonder, and Wren felt a warmth spread through her chest, for it was a comforting thing to know. But the heron also told them that if they wished to see for themselves, they might follow the silver river that flowed from the pool all the way to the Hill of Whispers, from which the whole sky could be seen at once. And so, thanking the wise old bird, Wren and Ember continued on their journey, following the gentle curve of the river as it wound its way through the sleeping forest. The water sang softly as it flowed, a sound like a lullaby half remembered, and the two travelers found their steps growing slower and their hearts growing calmer with every passing moment. Along the way they met other creatures, each one gentle and kind in the way of that peaceful place. A family of rabbits offered them clover to eat and told them stories of the meadow beyond the trees. A gray moth with wings like painted silk fluttered alongside them for a while, telling them how it loved the moon so dearly that it followed her light wherever she went. And an old badger, gruff but good-hearted, pointed them toward a shortcut through a tunnel of arching roots where glowing mushrooms lit the way in shades of blue and green and gold. With every friend they met, Wren felt more and more at home in this quiet and wondrous world. The tunnel of roots was cool and dim and smelled of rich earth and rain, and the glowing mushrooms cast a soft light that danced along the curving walls as they walked. Wren reached out and touched one of the little glowing caps, and it felt cool and smooth beneath her fingers, like polished glass, and it pulsed gently brighter for a moment as though pleased to be noticed. Ember padded quietly along beside her, his amber eyes reflecting the gentle colors, and he told her that this tunnel had been made long ago by the roots of the oldest tree in the forest, a tree so ancient that even the heron could not remember a time before it grew. Wren listened, wide-eyed, and felt as though she were walking through the very heart of a living thing that had dreamed for 1,000 quiet years. When they emerged from the tunnel, they found themselves in a small hollow where a spring bubbled up from between the stones, clear and cold and sweet. They stopped to rest there for a while, and Wren cupped her hands and drank from the spring, and the water tasted of mint and starlight and something she could not name, and it filled her with a gentle warmth that spread all the way to her fingertips. Ember lapped at the water beside her, and then he curled up in a patch of soft moss and told her more about the forest and its long and gentle history, his voice low and soothing in the quiet of the hollow. Wren rested her back against a mossy stone and listened, and she felt the last of her worries loosen and drift away like leaves upon a slow stream. As they rested, a small brown owl drifted down on silent wings and settled upon a low branch above them, blinking its great round eyes. It introduced itself in a soft and hooting voice as the keeper of the forest's oldest lullabies, and it offered to sing one for the weary travelers before they continued on their way. Wren nodded eagerly, and the little owl closed its eyes and began to sing a melody so gentle and so sweet that it seemed to come from the very air itself, a song about moonlight on still water and the safe warm dark of a nest at the end of a long day. When the song ended, Wren felt as though she had been wrapped in the softest of blankets, and even Ember's eyes had grown heavy and slow. They thanked the owl and rose at last to continue their journey, though they moved slowly now, unhurried and calm, for there was no reason to rush in a place so peaceful. The silver river guided them onward, winding between the great trees, and the drifting lights gathered thicker and brighter as they went, as though the whole forest were leaning gently toward the moon. Wren noticed that the deeper they traveled, the quieter and more beautiful everything became, and she began to understand that this was a place made entirely of rest and comfort, a place where nothing hurried and nothing feared and nothing was ever truly alone. At last the trees began to thin, and the ground rose gently beneath their feet, and they climbed together to the top of the Hill of Whispers. It was called by that name because a soft and constant breeze moved always across its grassy summit, carrying with it the murmured dreams of all the sleeping creatures of the forest. From the top of the hill, the whole world seemed to spread out below them, dark and peaceful and dotted with the tiny lights of distant homes, and above it all hung the great and glowing moon, larger and brighter than Wren had ever seen it before. They sat together upon the soft grass at the very top of the hill, the girl and the fox, and they gazed up at the moon in comfortable silence. Ember said that he understood now, and that he would never worry about the moon being lonely again, for he could see how it watched over everything with such gentle and loving care. Wren nodded, and as she looked up at that great silver light, she thought of her mother far away, and she realized that the same moon shone down upon them both, connecting them across all the miles between. The thought filled her with a deep and quiet peace. For a long while neither of them spoke, and there was no need for words, for the silence itself felt full and warm and complete. Below them the forest lay dark and gentle, and here and there among the trees they could see the soft glow of the drifting lights, moving slowly like the slow thoughts of a dreaming mind. The breeze moved across the summit of the hill and carried with it the murmured dreams of every sleeping creature, the rabbits in their burrows and the deer in their thickets and the owl in its high and hidden nest, and all those dreams were gentle and good, and they mingled together in the cool night air like a soft and wordless song. Wren felt that she was part of that song now, one small and peaceful note among many, and the feeling was the most comforting she had ever known. Ember told her, in his soft and sleepy voice, that the moon had a secret name that only the oldest creatures of the forest remembered, a name that meant the faithful watcher who never turns away. He said that on the clearest nights, if you listened very carefully, you could almost hear the moon humming to herself as she kept her patient watch, a low and gentle sound like the purring of a great and kindly cat. Wren closed her eyes and listened, and though she could not be certain, she thought that perhaps she did hear it, a soft and steady hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once, wrapping the whole quiet world in its tender and unbroken care. As they sat there, the breeze carried the whispered dreams of the forest all around them, and Wren found her eyelids growing heavy. The stars seemed to pulse softly, like the slow breathing of the sky itself, and the moon wrapped everything in its tender silver glow. Ember curled up beside her, his warm fur soft against her arm, and his bushy tail tucked neatly over his nose. He told her, in a sleepy voice, that this was the most peaceful place in all the world, and that anyone who came here always left feeling lighter than before, as though they had set down a heavy burden they had not even known they carried. Wren rested her head against the soft grass and let her eyes drift closed, listening to the gentle whispers of the hill and the soft breathing of the fox beside her. She felt utterly safe and utterly calm, held in the warm embrace of the quiet forest and the watchful moon above. The worries that had troubled her since coming to the new village seemed very small and far away now, like clouds drifting slowly past on a summer afternoon. She felt that she was exactly where she was meant to be, in this moment, in this place, with her new friend beside her and the whole peaceful world breathing softly all around. And as she lay there upon the hill of whispers, drifting slowly toward sleep, Wren became aware of a gentle silver light growing softly around her once again, the very same light that had carried her into the story in the first place. She did not feel afraid, for she understood now that it was simply the story drawing to its close, carrying her tenderly back to where she belonged. She whispered a soft farewell to Ember, and the little fox opened one sleepy amber eye and told her that she was welcome to return whenever she wished, for the door between the reading world and the story world was always open to those with gentle hearts. The silver mist gathered closer and softer, wrapping Wren in its warmth like a favorite blanket, and the forest and the hill and the moon all faded slowly and peacefully away. She felt herself sinking gently downward, as though settling into the softest of beds, and the last thing she heard was the distant song of the silver river and the whispered dreams of the sleeping forest, growing quieter and quieter until at last they melted into silence. And then she was resting once more in the deep and comfortable armchair at the back of the little bookshop, the green cloth book still open upon her lap. When Wren opened her eyes, the rain outside had stopped, and the golden light of early evening was slanting through the wavy glass windows, painting soft patterns across the wooden floor. Alara was sitting nearby in another armchair, a gentle smile upon her face and a cup of steaming tea held in her weathered hands. She asked Wren, in her soft and knowing voice, whether she had enjoyed her story, and Wren realized that somehow the old woman understood exactly where she had been and exactly what she had seen. She nodded, still half wrapped in the peaceful haze of the tale, and told Alara that it had been the most beautiful place she had ever visited. Wren sat quietly for a while, cradling the warm green book in her lap and watching the golden evening light move slowly across the floor. She felt different than she had when she first stepped in from the rain, lighter somehow, as though a small and heavy stone she had been carrying in her chest had finally been set down and left behind in the peaceful forest. The strange new village outside no longer seemed quite so cold or so unfamiliar, and the thought of returning to her grandmother's house did not fill her with the quiet dread it had that morning. She looked up at Alara with grateful eyes, and the old woman simply smiled, as though she had watched this very change come over many weary hearts before. Alara explained then, in a quiet and unhurried way, the secret of the Enchanted Bookshelf. She told Wren that certain books held true magic within their pages, and that a reader with a gentle and open heart could sometimes slip inside their stories and walk among them for a while. She said that these were healing stories, stories that soothed the weary and comforted the lonely and carried away the worries of anyone who needed rest. And she told Wren that she was always welcome to return to the shop, and that the green cloth book would be waiting for her upon the shelf whenever she wished to visit Ember and the peaceful forest once again. From that day forward, Wren visited the little bookshop often, and slowly the strange new village of Willowmere began to feel like home. She made friends among the village children and grew to love the winding cobblestone streets and the gentle song of the river in the evening. But on the nights when she felt lonely or restless or unable to sleep, she would return to the enchanted bookshelf and take down the green cloth book, and she would slip once more into the peaceful forest to sit beside her friend the fox and gaze up at the watchful moon. And each time she returned, she carried a little of that peace back with her into the waking world. There were nights, too, when Wren brought other lonely children to the shop, friends she had made who could not sleep or who carried worries too large for their small shoulders, and she would guide them gently toward the enchanted bookshelf and let them choose a book that seemed to lean toward them. And she watched, with quiet joy, as they slipped into their own peaceful stories and returned with the same lightness she had felt, the same soft and dreamy calm. She came to understand that the magic of the bookshelf was not only in the stories themselves, but in the kindness of sharing them, and in the gentle comfort of knowing that no one who entered the little shop would ever have to face the long dark hours entirely alone. The years passed gently in Willowmere, as years do, and Wren grew older and taller and wiser. But she never forgot the magic of the enchanted bookshelf, and she never stopped visiting the little crooked shop and the kind old woman who kept it. And when at last Alara grew very old and very tired, she called Wren to her side and placed into her hands the great ring of keys to the shop, and told her that she was to be the next keeper of the books, the next guardian of the enchanted bookshelf and all the gentle magic it held. Wren accepted the keys with tears of gratitude and joy, for she could imagine no greater gift in all the world. And so Wren became the keeper of the little bookshop in Willowmere, and she cared for the enchanted bookshelf with all the love and patience that Alara had taught her. She welcomed weary travelers and lonely children and anyone who needed a moment of peace, and she guided them gently toward the books that would carry them where they needed to go. And on quiet evenings, when the shop was locked and the lamps burned low, she would still take down the green cloth book and slip into the peaceful forest to sit beside Ember beneath the watchful moon, two old friends together in the most peaceful place in all the world, resting quietly beneath the stars as the whispers of the hill sang softly all around them, on and on, into the gentle and endless night.